The rain drummed against the windshield as the black sedan pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel. The towering glass structure gleamed under the city lights, an emblem of luxury and sophistication. Inside, guests in designer suits and evening gowns moved through the marble-floored lobby, their conversations a low murmur of wealth and ease. It was everything he had envisioned when he founded the chain. Yet tonight, he was not arriving as the owner. He stepped out of the car, adjusting the thick-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. His usual crisp suit had been replaced by a wrinkled button-up and a well-worn jacket, a deliberate choice to blend in. With a rolling suitcase in hand, he took a deep breath, steadying himself. It had been years since he'd stayed in one of his own hotels as a guest. Years since he'd walked through those doors without an entourage, without the weight of expectation that came with his name. As he entered, the warmth of the hotel wrapped around him, the air perfumed with the subtle scent of jasmine and expensive polish. A concierge barely glanced at him, his attention fixed on a well-dressed couple stepping out of a luxury car. No greeting, no acknowledgement. The first sign that something was amiss. At the front desk, a young woman stood alone, her posture stiff but professional. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and strands of hair had escaped from the neat bun at the nape of her neck. Her name tag read Emma. She forced a smile as he approached, though exhaustion flickered behind her expression. "Good evening, welcome," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with weariness. "Checking in." He nodded, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Yes, under Daniel Wright. The alias had been carefully chosen, common enough to be forgettable. Emma tapped at the keyboard, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "One moment, please." A tense silence settled between them, punctuated by the distant sound of luggage wheels rolling across aisle. She frowned slightly at the screen. "Apologies for the delay, Mr. Wright. We're experiencing staff shortages tonight." He didn't react outwardly, but inside, he noted the hesitance in her voice, the way she seemed to carefully choose her words. The hotel was operating on a skeleton crew. Why? Had the rumors been true? He had received reports of declining service, employees leaving without notice, and guest complaints piling up. It hadn't aligned with the pristine image his executives continued to sell him. But numbers and reports could only say so much. He needed to see it with his own eyes. Emma handed him a key card, her smile polite but strained. "You're in room 814. Elevators are just past the lobby bar." "Thank you." He hesitated for a beat. "Is everything all right here?" For the briefest moment, her expression faltered. A flicker of something, frustration? Sadness? But just as quickly, she masked it. "Of course," she said lightly, but there was no real conviction in her voice. "Enjoy your stay." He didn't press her, but as he took the keycard and stepped away, he heard her exhale, the kind of breath someone releases when they've been holding too much in for too long. The moment lingered in his mind as he made his way toward the elevators. On the surface, the hotel appeared immaculate. The crystal chandeliers, the carefully arranged floral displays, the rich scent of fresh linen. But beneath the polish, there was something off. An unease that stretched beyond Emma's tired smile. As he waited for the elevator, a raised voice caught his attention. "I don't want excuses, I want results." A man in a sharp navy suit loomed over a young bellboy, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter. The employee, barely in his 20s, shrank back, gripping the handle of a luggage cart. His uniform was slightly disheveled, beads of sweat forming at his temple. I'm sorry, sir, Sorry doesn't fix the fact that a guest had to wait 10 minutes for their bags," the manager snapped. His tone was laced with impatience, the kind that came from wielding unchecked power. "Maybe if you spent less time standing around and more time actually working, we wouldn't have these problems." The bellboy's jaw tensed, his hands tightening around the cart, but he said nothing. The manager scoffed and turned on his heel, storming off without a second glance. The young employee swallowed hard before wheeling the cart away, his face carefully blank. The CEO felt his pulse slow to something cold. He had trained his management to lead with respect, to inspire rather than belittle. Yet here was one of his own, treating an employee like disposable help. The elevator doors slid open, but instead of stepping inside, he turned back toward the lobby. His stay had just begun, and already he had seen enough to know that something was deeply wrong. As he passed the front desk again, Emma was speaking in hushed tones to another employee. He didn't intend to eavesdrop, but her next words stopped him in his tracks. If only the owner actually cared. A quiet statement. A whispered truth. His breath hitched, though he quickly masked it. He walked past without a glance, pretending not to have heard. But the words had lodged themselves deep. If only the owner actually cared. The weight of it sat heavy in his chest as he entered his room, the luxurious suite feeling colder than it should. He had built this company from the ground up, had poured years of his life into making it a beacon of excellence. Yet in the eyes of his employees, he was nothing more than a distant figure, absent and indifferent. He set his suitcase down with a quiet thud, staring out the window at the city skyline. Tomorrow he would start peeling back the layers. The early morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his suite, casting long shadows across the polished wood floors. The city outside hummed to life, but inside, the silence was heavy. He had barely slept. The words from the night before echoed in his mind, relentless in their weight. If only the owner actually cared. Pushing aside the crisp duvet, he dressed in the same unremarkable clothes he had arrived in. His usual routine, morning calls, executive meetings, a carefully curated schedule, was absent today. Instead, he had only one goal: to blend in, to see what existed beyond the glossy brochures and meticulously crafted reports. Downstairs, the lobby was already bustling. Guests checked out, rolling their suitcases across the marble floors, while a few early risers lingered near the cafe, sipping espresso from delicate porcelain cups. The atmosphere was polished, effortless, on the surface. But beneath it, he sensed the strain, the way employees moved with mechanical precision, their smiles too practiced, their interactions too rehearsed. Emma was at the front desk again, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. She looked more exhausted than the night before, though she tried to mask it. Her posture was stiff, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. A deep inhale, a forced smile. Then the next guest stepped forward. He lingered nearby, pretending to study a framed portrait of the hotel's founder. His own face stared back at him, captured in a moment of pride years ago. It felt foreign now. A voice beside him broke his thoughts. They cut our shift rotation again. It came from a housekeeper, a woman in her late 40s, whispering to a younger colleague as they pushed a cart of fresh linens down the hallway. They expect us to cover 12 rooms each with no extra pay. I told them we need more staff, but they don't listen. They never do. His chest tightened. 12 rooms per person? That was well beyond the company's policy. He followed at a distance, watching as the two housekeepers disappeared into the service corridor. The space beyond the guest areas was a stark contrast to the luxury outside. The walls were scuffed, the overhead lights flickering slightly. A single industrial fan hummed weakly in the corner, barely stirring the heavy air. Employees shuffled through in hurried silence, heads down, moving as if any moment of stillness would draw unwanted attention. Near the back, a small break room came into view. Inside, a handful of employees sat slumped in plastic chairs, eating quickly before their next shift. He recognized the young bellboy from the night before, the one who had been berated in the lobby. The boy stirred sugar into a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the table. "Another double shift?" someone asked. The bellboy nodded. "Manager said if I don't like it, I can leave." A dry laugh from another employee. That's their answer to everything. The CEO clenched his jaw. This wasn't a problem of a single disgruntled worker or a bad night of service. It was systemic. As he turned to leave, he nearly collided with Emma. She was rushing past, clutching a stack of paperwork to her chest. When she recognized him, she hesitated, her brows drawing together. "You're not supposed to be back here," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I got turned around," he lied smoothly. "Didn't realize this was staff only." She studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a tired sigh, she nodded toward the exit. "Come on. I'll walk you back." They stepped into the main hallway, the din of guests filling the space once more. He could sense the conflict in her, the instinct to stay professional warring with the exhaustion of someone who had held too much in for too long. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, keeping his tone light. 2 years. "You like it?" For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a small humorless chuckle, she said, "I used to." Something in her voice made him press further. "What changed?" Emma slowed, her grip on the paperwork tightening. She exhaled sharply, as if debating whether to say more. "It's not the guests," she finally admitted. "It's not even the job itself. It's just we're expected to do everything with nothing. They cut hours, cut staff, but the work keeps piling up. And the worst part," her voice lowered slightly, "they don't see us. Not really. We're just numbers to them." His stomach twisted. "I take it you're not a fan of the owner," he said carefully. Emma gave him a wry look. "I've never met him. None of us have. But what kind of person builds something like this, and then never looks back?" He had no answer. Before he could say more, a sharp voice rang out from across the lobby. "Emma." They both turned. The hotel manager stood near the entrance, arms crossed, irritation etched into every line of his face. "Do you have time to chat, or are you too busy entertaining guests?" Emma stiffened. "I was just—" "I don't want excuses," the manager cut in. His gaze flickered to the CEO, though he clearly didn't recognize him. "Sir, if you need assistance, the concierge is available." "I was just having a conversation," the CEO said, matching the manager's tone with quiet steadiness. The manager barely concealed his impatience. "Emma has work to do." A brief silence stretched between them. He could see it then, the barely masked fear in Emma's expression, the way she tensed like she was bracing for another reprimand. This wasn't just a difficult night. This was the way it always was. Emma turned to him, her polite mask back in place. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Wright." And with that, she walked away. The manager gave him a curt nod before following. He stood there for a long moment, watching them go, his hands curled into fists at his sides. This was no longer just an observation, no longer just an experiment to see what was happening behind the scenes. It was a reckoning. The air in the hotel felt heavier now, charged with the weight of everything he had seen. Every step through the lobby, every glance exchanged between exhausted employees, every hushed conversation behind closed doors, it all wove together into a damning truth. His hotel, the empire he had built, had become a place where people endured rather than thrived. And he had been blind to it. He had no intention of remaining silent any longer. Moving with quiet determination, he navigated through the back corridors again, past the break room where weary employees sat slumped in silence, past the housekeeping closet where a woman massaged her aching wrist before pulling on another pair of gloves, past the staff entrance where 2 workers lingered, discussing whether their paychecks would even cover rent this month. Everything inside him burned. But the final push came when he heard Emma's voice, low, tense, barely containing frustration. "I don't understand. We're barely getting by as it is. And now you want to cut hours again." He slowed, lingering just outside the open office door. The manager's voice was dismissive, coated with the smug authority of someone who had grown too comfortable wielding power over others. "Corporate decision. Nothing I can do about it." "Then let me talk to them," Emma pressed. A scoff. "And say what?" "That a front desk agent thinks she knows better than the people running this place." Her silence spoke louder than words. The manager continued, his tone hardening. "This is how it works. If you don't like it, you can leave. But I have a list of people who would take your job in a second. So, I suggest you focus on doing what you're paid to do." A long pause. Then, softer, Emma's voice cracked slightly. "You know this isn't right." The manager let out a slow, exaggerated sigh. "Emma, let me give you some advice. The people upstairs? They don't care about you. They don't care about any of us. We do what we're told. That's it. Now, if you're done, I suggest you get back to the desk before I start reconsidering your position." That was enough. The CEO stepped inside, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. Emma's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but the manager barely spared him a glance. "This is a private conversation," the manager said coolly. The CEO took a step closer, his expression calm but unwavering. "Seems more like a threat." At that, the manager finally looked up, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to." "I'd like to hear more about this corporate decision," the CEO interrupted, his voice even but laced with authority. The manager scoffed, shaking his head. "Look, I don't have time for." "Make time." The shift was instant. There was something in the way he spoke, something that made the manager hesitate. The air in the room thickened, as if an unspoken challenge had been laid out. Emma was watching, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. She didn't know who he was yet. Not really. But something told her this was more than just another guest standing up for her. The manager's jaw tightened. "Fine. You want to know the truth? The higher-ups only care about numbers. Cutting shifts, reducing staff, pushing people harder. That's how we stay profitable. That's how they stay happy. And trust me, whoever's running this place." He let out a bitter laugh. "They don't give a damn about what happens down here." Silence hung in the air. Then quietly, the CEO spoke. "I do." The manager frowned. "What?" The CEO took off his glasses, straightening to his full height. The disguise was subtle, but without the thick frames and carefully tousled hair, there was no mistaking who he was. Emma inhaled sharply. The manager paled. "I am the owner," he said, his voice steady but cold. "And I've seen enough." For a moment, the manager just stared, his mouth opening and closing as if grasping for words. Panic flickered in his eyes. "Sir, I didn't realize." "That much is obvious," the CEO cut in. His tone remained calm, but there was an edge to it now, sharp enough to slice through any attempt at excuses. "You were right about one thing. People upstairs should care about what happens down here. And I do. More than you clearly ever have." The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, Save it." The CEO's voice dropped slightly, a quiet thunder in the room. "I trusted people like you to uphold the values of this company, to lead with integrity. And instead, I found a culture of fear and neglect." He turned to Emma. "You spoke the truth when no one else would. And for that, I owe you more than an apology." Emma blinked, struggling to process the moment. Then he turned back to the manager. "Effective immediately, you're done here." The manager's face went slack. "W8. No more excuses. No more cutting corners at the expense of the people who keep this hotel running." His voice was iron now, unyielding. "Get your things and leave." The manager looked as if he wanted to protest, but one look at the CEO's expression silenced him. Without another word, he turned and walked out, his movements stiff with humiliation. A heavy silence followed. Emma stared at the CEO, still in disbelief. You're really him." "I am." His voice softened. "And I failed you." Emma shook her head, still trying to process everything. "I just never thought you'd actually be here. That you'd actually see what it's like. I see it now." His gaze was firm, unwavering. "And I'm going to fix it." For the first time since he'd arrived, he meant it. The next morning, the hotel felt different. The same opulent chandeliers cast their golden light across the lobby. The same soothing music played softly in the background, and guests still moved through the space, oblivious to what had transpired the night before. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The staff walked with cautious energy, their movements tense but tinged with something new. Hope, or at the very least, curiosity. Rumors had already spread. The manager was gone. The owner had been here. And more importantly, he had seen them. At the front desk, Emma straightened a stack of papers, her mind still spinning. She had barely slept, replaying every moment, every word spoken in that office. She had spent years convincing herself that people like him, the ones at the top, never really cared. But now, here he was, standing in the middle of the lobby, watching everything with sharp, thoughtful eyes, no longer a shadowy figure behind boardroom doors. And then he moved. The CEO walked with purpose, but not with the distance of an executive inspecting his property. No, he was looking at people. He was seeing them. When he stopped by the bellboy station, the young man who had been berated 2 nights ago straightened in surprise. "I heard you've been pulling double shifts," the CEO said, his voice measured. The bellboy hesitated, nodding. "Yes, sir. Not anymore." The words were firm, undeniable. "From now on, scheduling will be fair. No more back-to-back doubles unless someone willingly requests them. And pay adjustments are coming." The bellboy blinked, as if trying to determine whether this was real. "Thank you, sir." The CEO nodded once, then moved on. In the break room, he found the housekeeping staff gathered around their usual table, whispering. They fell silent when they saw him, their eyes wary. "I owe you an apology," he said, without preamble. "And I owe you better." One of the older housekeepers set down her coffee. "Sir, no one should be expected to clean 12 rooms alone. That changes today. More staff will be hired immediately." He glanced around, making sure each person saw the sincerity in his face. "And wages will increase across departments. No more cutting corners at your expense." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the group. One woman looked down at her hands, pressing her lips together as if to keep from crying. Finally, someone spoke. "We've been asking for this for years." "I know." His voice was heavy. "And I wasn't listening. But I am now." By the time he returned to the lobby, Emma was waiting. She studied him for a moment, then crossed her arms. "You're really doing this?" "I am." Her brow furrowed, but there was something softer in her gaze now. "What made you come here in the first place?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to see my company through the eyes of the people who make it run." A pause. "And what I saw," his voice trailed off, his jaw tightening. "I built this place to be extraordinary. But somewhere along the way, I stopped looking past the numbers. I let others make decisions in my name. That ends today." Emma held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. As the day went on, the changes became more tangible. An emergency meeting was called, department heads summoned. The CEO stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding but uncharacteristically open. He didn't deliver a rehearsed speech. He spoke plainly, honestly. "We lost sight of what matters," he admitted. "And I take full responsibility for that. This hotel is not just marble floors and high thread count sheets. It's the people who welcome guests with a smile even when they're exhausted. It's the ones who stay late to make sure the job gets done. And from now on, we invest in them." The silence in the room was thick with disbelief, but also something else, something hopeful. After the meeting, Emma found herself watching him from across the lobby. The man she had thought was absent, detached, had proven to be something entirely different. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that change was truly coming.